to Birdville ISD's Strategies and Structures Training for 2013, Making Thinking Visible. We began this journey last year by training all Birdville staff on strategies such as graphic organizers and foldables. This year, we will begin by adding 5 new strategies to your teaching repertoire. These strategies will also be added to the lesson planner checklist in Forethought. The focus of this training is designed to take student thinking out of the hidden corners of their minds and make it visible. In Birdville ISD, we are making thinking visible in 2013. The strategies you will learn about today have been gathered from the book Making Thinking Visible. This book is a product of the Harvard Graduate School's Project Zero, and all of the strategies are based on data Harvard has collected about how children and adults learn. These strategies are research-based and are intended to move student learning beyond teaching and test-taking to thinking and understanding at rigorous levels. By making thinking visible, we enrich classroom learning and foster students' intellectual development. Our classroom goals are deeper understanding of the content, greater motivation for learning, and development of thinking and learning abilities. We want every classroom to be a community of enthusiastically engaged thinkers and learners.
In this day of rigorous standards, students must be able to think their way through ideas. They cannot simply memorize and recite information, but instead, they must be able to explore ideas and use the powers of cognition to draw conclusions. When thinking is visible, it becomes clear that school is not about memorizing content, but exploring ideas. When thinking is visible in classrooms, students are in a position to be more metacognitive. The most complex acts of learning occur within the mind, where they can either be locked away or brought out into the light so that students can think about their thinking in a more tangible way. When student thinking is made visible, teachers can better identify gaps in cognition that, if left unfilled, can lead to a variety of learning struggles. Teachers benefit when they can see students thinking because misconceptions, prior knowledge, reasoning ability, and degrees of understanding are more likely to be uncovered. With the thinking that underlies student performance uncovered, teachers can now address any challenges and extend the student's thinking by meeting them at their current skill level. When the teacher only sees right or wrong answers, there's no way to know what caused the student to miss the mark. But when the thinking is made visible, the teacher can better see where each student needs help.
In Birdville ISD, we want to move our students from a story of work to a story of learning. Most of us attended school where the focus was on completing work. The larger purpose behind activities wasn't clear. Grades were the payoff for work, school was seen as the student's job, and good students did the work they were assigned without question. Unfortunately, that many times led to a story of alienation. In a story of alienation, school wasn't about you, your life, or your culture. The focus wasn't learning, it was about having the right answers. A divide existed between those who were smart and others who just couldn't get it. Rewards only went to those who could guess what the teacher wanted, and most people studied by memorizing. We all know people who couldn't succeed in this system because this system doesn't truly measure their ability or level of critical thinking. We want to move away from a story of work and into a story of learning. We want to build a culture where all students are valued and able to achieve success. In a story of learning, learning is a result of thinking. It involves uncovering complexity and delving deeply. Learning is an active process and requires the learner to become personally involved. In a true story of learning, there isn't only one right answer, and questions not only drive learning, but also are outcomes of the learning.
According to the Oxford English Dictionary, there are approximately 250,000 distinct words in the English language. The word think ranks in the top 125 to 136 in terms of frequency in print and is the 12th most used verb in the English language. Clearly, the word think is incredibly important in our speech and writing, but what does it actually mean to think? What kinds of mental activity are we trying to encourage in our classrooms? What types of thinking do our lessons promote? In the field of education, Bloom's taxonomy has taken on a meaning and application that was never the intent of the research. Thinking doesn't happen in a lockstep, sequential manner, systemically progressing from one level to the next. It is much messier, complex, dynamic, and interconnected than that. Thinking is intricately connected to content, and for every type or act of thinking, we can discern levels or performances. Understanding is not simply a type of thinking one does, but it is in fact a chief goal of thinking. This list of high leverage thinking moves are essential in aiding the development of understanding, and if you look closely, you will see the verbs which bring cognitive rigor to the text's essential knowledge and skills. The importance of curiosity and questioning in propelling learning is essentially seen in our experience as learners. We know that when our curiosity is sparked and we have a desire to know and learn something, our engagement is heightened. Questions are an ongoing part of developing understanding. The questions we ask at the outset of a learning journey change, morph, and develop as that journey moves forward. Questions which help shape student thinking may include: where else have I seen something like this? Why is this the way it is? How does this connect to the topic I've been studying? Where does this fit within the grand scheme of things? What is it like? What is it not like? If I were to group these things, what would go together? What's a metaphor that might fit this? Why? Even after extensive efforts to develop understanding, we find that we may be left with more questions than when we started. These few questions reflect our depth of understanding as we push to identify the complexity in the events, stories, and ideas before us.
We have established the benefits of making our students' thinking visible, but how do we accomplish this? Thinking routines provide a framework for incorporating visible thinking into powerful lesson design, no matter what the content area or grade level. These routines are simple tools that may be used to support specific thinking moves. Each routine is designed to strategically engage students in the variety of cognitive moves that drive the process of learning. These routines provide structures for scaffolding instruction so that students can move through exploration and discussion while documenting and directing their thinking and learning. To the refined academic, these routines may seem simple because they represent the patterns of behavior that occur subconsciously, allowing us to use our minds well in new situations. By explicitly teaching these thinking routines and consistently engaging students in their own thinking, they will eventually develop automatic thinking patterns without the need for the prescribed routines. The thinking routines allow students to advance their understanding because they never stop with a right answer. Always, questions of why and how push the students to a deeper analysis. And by making this thinking not only visible to themselves, but also to their peers and teachers, students will benefit from a synthesis of collaborative thinking as well as more precise guidance from the teacher. These routines are very easy to learn and are broken into simple steps that the students and teacher can remember. They're goal-oriented and encourage students to actively engage in learning that extends well beyond just the facts.
Making Thinking Visible organizes the 21 thinking routines into 3 major categories. These categories reflect the way teachers often plan for and attend to the different parts of a unit of study. Introducing and exploring routines tend to be used early in a unit to develop interest and begin inquiry. Synthesizing and organizing routines are useful in making sense of the new information that they have read, discussed, or viewed during a unit of study. Digging deeper routines go a step further and push students to go below the surface of things and consider the complexity of issues and ideas. In BISD, we have selected the initial 5 routines for study and implementation. Additional routines will be added throughout the year during professional learning opportunities. In the category of introducing and exploring ideas, we will begin with 2 routines: Think, Puzzle, Explore, and Explanation Game. The intent behind using Think, Puzzle, Explore is to activate prior knowledge, wondering, and planning. It is good at the beginning of a unit to direct personal or group inquiry and to uncover current understandings as well as misconceptions. This routine began with the traditional KWL, which is commonly used in classrooms, but with the intention for redesigning it to make it less fact-driven and more inquiry and process-oriented. In setting up Think, Puzzle, Explore, the teacher needs to plan some form of documentation, such as collaborative groups generating sticky notes, taking dictation on the whiteboard, etc. The first step in this routine is to think. Ask the students to answer the question, "What do you think you know about?" Give students time to think and gather their ideas and to draw on past recollections and experiences. Students can then say or jot down their thinking. Oftentimes, students will build on one another's ideas, so recognize that new ideas will emerge as public sharing begins. Step 2 is to puzzle. Ask, what questions or puzzles do you have? You may want to push thinking further by prompting them with additional questions, such as, what are you wondering or curious about? Students should share their puzzles. Step 3 is to explore. Ask, how can we explore these puzzles? Share the thinking or make it visible. Much of the students' thinking is shared when this routine is being done as a whole group. If it is done in small groups, then you might want to have groups report out, focusing on the puzzles, or you might ask them to review the class's responses and group together puzzles which have strong connections or themes. Students could then work to plan the exploration of these questions and puzzles they found most interesting.
The second strategy in the Introducing and Exploring Ideas category is the explanation game. Understanding often involves recognizing the parts of a thing, what they do, how they function, their roles and purposes. This thinking routine was designed to get students to look closely at features and details of an object or occurrence, and then to generate multiple explanations for why something is the way it is. In this sense, this routine is the part of an exercise in the deconstruction of a thing, or an exercise in understanding the whole by examining its parts. The explanation game asks learners to build causal explanations for why something is the way it is and to understand the purposes or reasons why something functions the way it does. It's the noticing of parts and generating possible and even alternative theories and explanations about the relationship between those parts and the whole that makes this routine powerful for developing understanding. In this routine, there are 4 basic steps: name it, explain it, give reasons, and generate alternatives. In step 1, students will draw their attention to an object that you would like them to understand better. Resist asking students to tell you what the object is. The purpose isn't to identify the object, but to explore why it is the way that it is. Invite them to look carefully at the object or the text to see all that they can possibly see so they can begin speculating as to how different features are related to one another. The students will share with a partner or a group and discuss the features that they have observed. Step 2, they will begin explaining the list of features that they developed in step 1. The goal is to come up with as many explanations as possible for how these particular parts work to make up the whole object or artifact or text. Often sticky notes are a great tool for documenting this step. Next, in step 3, students will give the reasons. They don't stop just at what they've observed, but they start to come up with why. What is the evidence for why their explanations are plausible? What evidence do you have for why a certain feature is explained a certain way? What do you see that makes you explain it that way? And in step 4, they will generate alternatives. You want to encourage your students to press for alternative explanations. Pay attention to those relationships between the parts that they have observed, why they are the way they are, and how those parts affect the whole. Students will ask one another, what makes you say that, after each alternative explanation is offered.
Once material is presented, it is important to teach our students a way to process the information. Headlines and I used to think, now I think are two strategies that do this. Headlines is a strategy that can be used to create quick summaries of the big ideas or what stands out. This is a perfect opportunity for you as the teacher to ensure what your students are learning with regard to the topic discussed. Since the headlines routine calls for synthesis, it is often situated within an ongoing arc of learning to help students get a sense of what lies at the core of a topic that may have many layers or nuances. Headlines creates an opportunity to capture the essence of a few fundamental ideas. This routine can be used after a single episode of learning, such as a field trip, reading of a book, completing a lab, or so on. It can help students identify what was important or stood out to them about the experience. Getting a sense of what students saw as important can be useful in planning for future instruction. Step 1. Setup. After students have had some learning experiences, ask them to consider what they think some of the core ideas and what they are learning seem to be. Invite them to look back over their notes or write text for ideas. Step 2. Write a headline. Ask the students to write a headline for this topic or issue that captures an important aspect or core idea that we would want to remember. Students can do this individually or with partners, depending on what the teacher desires. Step 3. Share the thinking. Once students have had an opportunity to draft a headline, ask them to share their headlines with students around them. It is important that students not only share their headlines, but also the story and reasoning behind their choice, unpacking the headline for others. This step is not a competition for the best headline. The goal is to create a forum in which different perspectives and nuances are surfaced. Step 4. Invite further thinking. Once pairs or small groups have had the opportunity to share their headlines and tell the stories of their headlines with each other, you can create a class collection of the headlines that document the group's thinking. Working with a collection of headlines, you might encourage your class to search for common themes or elements among the headlines.
The second of the synthesizing and organizing routines is I used to think, now I think. This is a routine which focuses on reflecting and metacognition. It is used to help learners reflect on how their thinking has shifted and changed over time. It is a reflective routine which focuses attention on how the development of understanding is not just an accumulation of new information, but often results in changes in thinking. It develops reasoning skills and helps students identify cause and effect relationships. Selecting this routine, whenever students' initial thoughts, opinions, or beliefs are likely to have changed as a result of instruction or experiences. After reading new information, watching a film clip, listening to a speaker, experiencing something new, having a class discussion, conducting a lab, or completing a unit of study are all potentially powerful times a teacher might use this routine. It is more effective when the object of reflection is conceptual or process-oriented rather than an accumulation of new facts. Step 1. Encourage individual reflection. When we began this study, you all had some initial ideas about it. Take a minute to think back to when we started and remember what kinds of ideas you once held. Write what it is that you used to think about our topic, starting off with the words, I used to think. Step 2. Now think about how your ideas about this topic have changed as a result of what we've been studying, doing, and discussing in class. Write a few lines to capture where your thinking is now, starting with the phrase, now I think. Share the thinking. You might do this as a whole class or in small groups. Avoid giving students the idea that they had wrong thinking before and right thinking now. Be genuinely curious about how thinking has grown, deepened, shifted, or changed as a result of classroom instruction. We have selected a simple but powerful routine to help students dig deeper. The name of this strategy is What Makes You Say That. What makes you say that is a routine designed to help students identify the basis for their thinking by asking them to elaborate on the thinking that lies behind their response. When used as a regular part of classroom discourse, it goes a long way toward fostering a disposition toward evidential reasoning. In step 1, there's no formal setup that is needed. Simply remember to place it naturally in response to a student's explanatory or interpretive comments. Look for moments when students make assertions, give explanations, provide interpretations, or offer opinions. Step 2. Ask students to share. Ask the key question as a follow-up. The goal is to elicit and support students' attempts at justification. And step 3 is sharing the thinking. This is not usually documented in writing, but in verbally sharing the reasoning behind their thinking. Remember, use a genuine tone of respect that conveys interest in the response. It shouldn't sound like a challenge or a test.
Now you know about BISD's first 5 thinking routines. You will have the opportunity to explore content-specific applications of each routine throughout the day if you are an elementary teacher, and in the next video if you are secondary. We will now discuss some tips for getting started with implementing these thinking routines in your classroom. First, have great expectations. Students surprise us daily with their connections, ideas, and the multiple languages they use to make their thinking visible. Do the routines pretty much as stated initially. It may feel uncomfortable, but wait to see what you learn from using them before adapting them. Third, match the routines with content and skills that are significant to students. The routines aren't the content, they are the vehicles for exploring the content. 4. Model the language for younger and less language-able students. Build up the language over time and by modeling your own thinking. Use the language of thinking as often as you can. Name students' actions like, "You made a connection," or "I find your point of view very interesting," and so on. 6. Document students' thinking. It sends a clear message about how much we value students, their thoughts, and work, and it allows revisiting, reflecting on, and reinforcing the topics later. 7. Give yourself permission to be a learner and experiment with the routines in a variety of ways. Understand that this is a process that takes time. Be patient, consistent, and a risk taker. Focus on the thinking you want to promote and why it is important. This will help you attend to students' thinking as it emerges. And finally, include parents in the process. They are your allies, and it is amazing how they become the first advocates for the use of thinking language at home. In order to support you as you work to make student thinking visible in your classroom, we've made a number of resources available to you on the Strategies and Structures website. There you will find this video, the content-specific videos, and one-pager handouts describing the steps and potential applications of each routine. Resources for graphic organizers and foldables are posted there as well. You can access this website directly at schools.birdvilleschools.net/SNS. Also, the link is posted right there in your Forethought lesson planner. Under Yearly Documents, click on Structures and Strategies and pull up the link in the Resources box. Finally, you can also get to the same website from the C&I department page under the Resources heading. In Birdville ISD, we are making thinking visible in 2013. The C&I team is committed to supporting you in the work ahead, and we're so excited to see what this year will bring. On behalf of each child who will enter your classrooms next week, thank you for all you do to fulfill our district motto, learning for all, whatever it takes.